If you were at that Browns-Panthers joint training session, you probably saw it. And if you weren't, you've definitely heard about it by now. Shedeur Sanders didn't just participate. He flat out owned the field. The rookie quarterback everyone's been whispering about finally got a high-pressure, high-visibility stage against another NFL defense. And he delivered the kind of performance that makes fans lose their minds and haters quietly reconsider their life choices.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
From the very first snap, Sanders looked locked in. No wide-eyed rookie jitters, no just happy to be here energy. This was a quarterback who knew the offense, trusted his reads, and made decisions like he'd been running this system for years. His timing was razor-sharp, especially with Jimmy Horn Jr., his former college teammate. The chemistry between them was so obvious that it almost felt unfair. Horn would break out of his route, turn, and the ball would already be there, placed exactly where only he could grab it. It wasn't just about one connection, though. Sanders spread the ball around, working through progressions and hitting receivers in stride against tight coverage. His quick release kept Carolina's pass rush from ever getting home, and his ability to slide in the pocket to create throwing lanes looked more polished than most rookies this early in camp. You could see the Browns coaching staff watching closely, not just taking notes, but stealing glances at each other every time Sanders threaded one through a window that barely existed. Myles Garrett, who doesn't hand out praise lightly, told reporters afterward that Sanders brings juice to the offense and carries himself like a leader. Coming from one of the most respected voices in the Browns locker room, that's not just a compliment. It's a stamp of approval. And it wasn't just his own team noticing. Bryce Young, the Panthers QB and fellow young gun, made a point to dap Sanders up after drills, telling him he respected the way he commanded the huddle. Even the media personalities who live for skepticism are starting to flip. Colin Cowherd, never shy about pushing bold takes, went on air saying Sanders isn't just NFL ready. He's NFL dangerous. He pointed to Sanders' comfort in the pocket, his mastery of the offense despite limited first-team reps, and his mental composure as proof that the Browns might already have their next franchise quarterback. Of course, every great performance has a side effect. The haters get loud. But this time, it's more of a nervous loud than a confident one. You can almost hear the panic between the lines of their criticism. They can see it too. The rookie they doubted is running joint practices like a seasoned vet, winning over teammates, and making an opposing defense look like it needs extra drills. Now, the buzz has reached fever pitch heading into the preseason game. Sanders has everyone, coaches, veterans, rivals, and fans, waiting to see if he can replicate this dominance under the lights. If he does, the Browns' so-called quarterback competition might be over before it ever really started. And if you've been paying attention to the way he's handled every test so far, you know one thing. Shedeur Sanders isn't just here to participate. He's here to take the job. The moment practice ended and players jogged toward the sideline, you could feel it. This wasn't just another day at camp. There was a buzz running through the Browns' sideline, a kind of electric hum that only happens when someone just changed the temperature of an entire building. Shedeur Sanders had gone toe-to-toe with the Carolina Panthers defense in a setting that can humble even the most confident rookies, and instead of shrinking under the pressure, he looked like he was born for it. The thing about joint practices is that they can be brutal for quarterbacks. You're facing a defense that's not your own, with no game clock to hide behind, no soft play calls to protect you, and defensive coordinators throwing every weird blitz package they can cook up. There's nowhere to hide, and every snap is being watched by your coaches, their coaches, and every beat reporter on the sideline. It's like being on stage in front of two audiences at once, your fans and your critics. Sanders didn't just handle that pressure, he thrived in it. From the first 11-on-11 session, his command was obvious. He was barking out adjustments at the line, changing protections, and using hard counts to draw defenders offside. When the Panthers tried to disguise coverages, he didn't bite. He went to his second or third read and still delivered the ball on time. This wasn't a rookie trying to survive. This was a quarterback actively dictating terms. That's what had his teammates so fired up. Jimmy Horn Jr., who's known Sanders since their college days, was grinning ear to ear after hauling in a sideline catch that Sanders fit between two defenders. "It's like we never left," Horn said later, laughing as he replayed the route in his head. "He just knows where I'm going to be, and I know where the ball's coming. It's trust." But this wasn't just a reunion highlight reel. Sanders made a point to involve everyone. Tight ends were getting work over the middle, running backs were catching checkdowns in stride, and he even took a few calculated deep shots to stretch the Panthers' secondary. He wasn't reckless, he was strategic, forcing Carolina to defend every inch of the field. What really stood out was the leadership piece. Between drills, Sanders was constantly talking, pulling a receiver aside to adjust a route, checking in with the offensive line about protection calls, even walking over to the defense to chat after a play. It wasn't cocky, it was collaborative. He's the kind of guy who seems to raise the energy of everyone around him without trying to make it about himself. Myles Garrett, one of the team's most respected voices, summed it up perfectly. "Some guys walk in and act like they've been here forever, and it feels fake. With Shedeur, it's just natural. He's not pretending. He's just being himself. And that's what makes people want to follow him." Even the Panthers' sideline couldn't help but notice. Bryce Young, who knows exactly what it's like to be a young quarterback under the microscope, came over to shake his hand after one session. That moment wasn't just about mutual respect. It was a nod from one young leader to another, an unspoken, "Yeah, you belong here." The media reaction was almost immediate. Reporters who had been cautious about praising Sanders too early started putting words like "ready" and "poised" in their tweets. Colin Cowherd went on his show the next morning and said the Browns were sitting on a gold mine, arguing that Sanders' processing speed and pocket comfort were already at a starting caliber level. Of course, the performance also turned the volume up on his critics. There are always going to be voices saying it's just practice, or let's see it in a real game. And they're not wrong. Preseason football is a different animal. But there's something undeniable about the way Sanders has been stacking days like this. It's not a one-off. He's been building a reputation for consistency, and joint practice against another team just made that visible to the rest of the league. If you looked closely at the Browns' coaching staff during the session, you could see the gears turning. Head coach Kevin Stefanski isn't the type to make emotional decisions based on one hot day, but he's also not blind to momentum. When a rookie quarterback commands the offense with that much confidence against an unfamiliar defense, it's not something you can ignore. It forces you to at least consider what it might look like if that same guy was leading your team on Sundays. That's where things get interesting. Officially, the Browns still have a quarterback depth chart that favors experience. But football isn't just about seniority. It's about who can win games right now. And every time Sanders goes out and delivers against NFL-level defenses, that conversation shifts just a little bit more in his favor. The locker room dynamic is already tilting. Veterans like Garrett Amari Cooper and Joel Bitonio have gone out of their way to publicly back Sanders, praising his attention to detail and the calm way he handles mistakes. When a rookie gets that kind of endorsement from established leaders, it carries weight. It tells the coaching staff, "We trust this guy." And in football, trust is currency. The fans are all in. Social media is filled with clips from the joint practice. Tight spirals into tight windows, smooth rollouts, and quick releases under pressure. Local talk radio callers aren't asking if Sanders will start this year. They're asking when. It's the kind of buzz that can put pressure on a front office, especially in a city hungry for a quarterback to believe in. But here's what might be the most impressive part. Sanders hasn't changed. The cameras might be closer, the praise might be louder, but he's still the same guy staying late after practice to throw extra routes. Still the guy studying film like he's cramming for a final exam. He's not letting the hype run away from him, and that's why it's growing even faster. The Browns' upcoming preseason game is about to become must-watch football, not just for Cleveland fans, but for anyone curious to see if the rookie can translate this dominance under the lights. Joint practices are one thing. A game setting, even in preseason, brings a different kind of heat. Defenses disguise more, game speed ramps up, and every mistake is magnified. But if Sanders keeps playing with the same composure he's shown so far, it's hard to imagine the hype slowing down. The Panthers game might not technically decide the starting job, but it could be the tipping point. If Sanders delivers again, if he shows the same accuracy, leadership, and decision-making he displayed in that joint practice, the Browns' quarterback competition could stop being a competition altogether. And if that happens, well, the haters better get comfortable being mad, because Shedeur Sanders isn't just proving he belongs in the NFL. He's making a case that he belongs at the front of the line. The minutes after that joint practice ended felt like the tail end of a prize fight. Players from both teams drifted toward their respective locker rooms, trading quick handshakes and a few lingering trash talk smiles. The Carolina Panthers walked away knowing they'd been tested. The Cleveland Browns walked away knowing they'd seen something important, something that might just change the way their quarterback room looks for the rest of the season. Shedeur Sanders, helmet tucked under one arm, wasn't strutting. He wasn't basking in the noise that had followed him all day. Instead, he was talking with Jimmy Horn Jr. as they walked, going over a seam route they'd just run against Carolina's nickel coverage. That's Sanders in a nutshell, always dissecting, always tweaking, even after one of the cleanest showings a rookie quarterback could ask for. Inside the Browns' locker room, the vibe was lighter than usual. It wasn't a win in the standings, but in the culture of an NFL team, a day like that matters. Veterans were laughing louder. Position coaches were lingering with their guys a little longer. The energy was contagious, and it all traced back to the way Sanders had carried himself during those sessions. Myles Garrett was the first to say something in front of the team. "That's what I'm talking about," he said, voice carrying across the room. "Command the field like that every day, and the rest takes care of itself." Garrett's not one for empty praise. When he says it, it's because he means it. And the fact that he addressed Sanders in front of everyone, that was a subtle nod of acceptance into the team's inner circle. Later, during the film review session, the coach's excitement was more restrained, but no less real. Kevin Stefanski ran the room with his usual calm, but there was a little extra weight in his pauses when Sanders' plays came up. They watched one sequence where Carolina disguised a blitz by showing two deep coverage before rotating a safety down late. Sanders read it instantly, shifted the protection call, and got the ball to his hot route for a 9-yard gain. It wasn't flashy, but it was the kind of decision veterans pride themselves on making. "This," Stefanski said, tapping the screen with a laser pointer, "is why you study. That's pre-snap recognition, that's knowing your guys, and that's staying in rhythm." He didn't single Sanders out much during review, but moments like that said enough. Privately, the offensive coaches had started floating the what-if scenarios. What if Sanders kept this up through the rest of camp? What if his decision-making stayed this sharp in live preseason games? And most importantly, what would it do for the offense to have a quarterback who could move the ball with this kind of efficiency while also commanding the room the way he did? It wasn't lost on anyone that the Browns' veteran quarterbacks had been steady but not spectacular. The offense had moved, but it hadn't popped. With Sanders in, you could feel a different energy. Routes seemed to open faster. Players came out of the huddle with more urgency, and even the linemen seemed a little more amped to protect him. For Sanders, none of that noise mattered, or at least, that's what he told himself. In his mind, the day was already behind him. He had a preseason game coming up, and joint practice tape doesn't mean anything if you can't back it up when the lights are on. That night, while most players went home to unwind, Sanders stayed late at the facility. He watched the Panthers' defensive tape from the last preseason, looking for tendencies he might see again. He texted Jimmy Horn Jr. about a couple of route adjustments. He went through his own footwork drills in an empty indoor field. No cameras, no audience, just the sound of cleats on turf. Jimmy Horn laughed about it later. I told him, "Man, you already killed it today." And he was like, "Yeah, but tomorrow's not today." That's how he is. He treats every rep like it's his last chance to prove himself. Meanwhile, the buzz outside the facility kept building. Local sports talk spent an entire segment on the chemistry between Sanders and Horn, playing clips from practice like they were game highlights. Fans started buying up more of Sanders' jerseys, and Brown's social media couldn't post anything with him in it without the comments filling up with calls for him to start week 1. Of course, there were still doubters. A few analysts pointed out that joint practices are controlled environments, that defenses aren't running their full playbooks, that quarterbacks can get into a rhythm without the chaos of a real game. But that's the thing. Those controlled environments are exactly where rookies are expected to make mistakes. Sanders wasn't just surviving them. He was dictating the pace. The next day, during a closed team meeting, Stefanski addressed the entire roster about the week's joint practices. He praised the offensive line for holding up against a solid Panthers pass rush, credited the receivers for their route discipline, and made a point to call out the defensive backs for keeping their energy up in the heat. And then, without naming names, he said, "Some of you showed you're ready for more than we've been giving you. Keep stacking days, and you'll get it." Everyone in the room knew who that was about. The preseason game plan was adjusted quietly. Sanders would get more snaps than originally scheduled, and they'd open up the playbook just a bit more for him, not enough to show everything, but enough to see how he handled more complex reads against live action. That week of prep was intense. Sanders split time with the veterans in team drills, but when it was his turn, the pace seemed to jump. The offense was crisp, the calls were clean, and mistakes were minimal. He had moments, an overthrown ball here, a slightly late check down there, but nothing that rattled him. By Thursday, the veterans weren't just tolerating him. They were actively pulling for him. You could hear it in the way they talked to him in huddles, in the way linemen slapped his helmet after a good series, in the way defensive players would joke with him after getting beat on a throw. That kind of buy-in doesn't happen if guys think you're a flash in the pan. The night before the game, Sanders called Jimmy Horn Jr. into the film room. They stayed there for 2 hours, going over every possible coverage they might see from Carolina's backups. They didn't just talk routes, they talked timing, body language, and how to recognize subtle defensive cues. Horn later said it felt like being back in college again, except the stakes were way higher. Game day arrived, and the Browns' sideline had that subtle hum again. The veterans were loose, but alert. The rookies were buzzing, and Sanders was calm. Not quiet, not withdrawn calm. He went through warm-ups methodically, running every drill with the same precision he'd had in practice all week. When his turn came to step onto the field, there wasn't a single hesitation in his walk. He took the huddle, called the play, and locked eyes with each guy. "Let's go in the rep," he said. Not the game, not the drive, the rep, one play at a time. What happened next wasn't perfect. No rookie preseason outing is. But it was a kind of performance that cements everything people had been feeling since that joint practice. Sanders moved the offense. He made quick, decisive throws. He hit Jimmy Horn Jr. on a perfectly timed out route that drew applause from the sideline. He converted a 3rd and long with a dart over the middle. And most importantly, when he made a mistake, he didn't spiral. He adjusted, came back, and made the next play count. When he came off the field after his final series, Garrett was the first to greet him with a high five. Stefanski gave him a nod, not over the top, just enough to say, "We saw that." And the fans? They were already chanting his name. It didn't mean he'd won the starting job. Not yet. But it meant something just as valuable. He'd erased any doubt about whether he could handle the moment. And for a rookie quarterback in the NFL, that's the first battle you have to win. When the final whistle blew, the scoreboard didn't matter. It was preseason. The only numbers that stuck with people were the ones tied to Shedeur Sanders' drives, completions, first downs, time of possession. But the truth is, the real story wasn't in the stat sheet. It was in the way the team carried themselves after he stepped onto the field. The Browns' sideline felt different when Sanders was in the game. Receivers were bouncing between plays. The offensive line had a little more snap in their sets. Even the defense was standing closer to the field, watching instead of sitting back. That's the unmeasurable part of quarterback play, how your presence changes the people around you. Inside the locker room afterward, Sanders was greeted with the usual mix of handshakes, helmet taps, and quick jokes. Jimmy Horn Jr. walked past, shaking his head. "You remember that scene we talked about last night? You hit it exactly like we said." Sanders just grinned and shrugged. "That's the job, right?" Kevin Stefanski addressed the team, keeping the tone measured. He praised the collective effort, highlighted some individual plays on offense and defense, and reminded everyone that preseason is about building toward September. But when he mentioned composure under fire and playing beyond your years, a few eyes turned toward Sanders. No names were dropped, but the message was clear enough. Later that night, in the quiet after the adrenaline wore off, Sanders sat with his tablet in the film room. Most guys had already left. He rewound a second-quarter play 3 times, a throw to a tight end on a crossing route that he felt came out a split second late. It had still moved the chains, but to Sanders, it wasn't clean enough. That's where his head goes, not to the highlight throws, but to the ones he could make better. That detail-oriented mindset is why the joint practice buzz hasn't faded. It's also why veterans are starting to talk about him in a way that matters. NFL locker rooms are brutally honest environments. If a rookie's not ready, it doesn't take long for word to spread. But when older players start giving you quiet nods of approval, when they start saying good work instead of keep working, you know you've crossed a line into real respect. Myles Garrett said as much in a conversation with a small group of players later in the week. You can't fake leadership, he said, glancing over at Sanders, who was at another table going over protections with 2 linemen. Either you have it or you don't. And he's got it. That kind of endorsement isn't just talk, it filters upward. Coaches hear it. Position groups repeat it. And eventually, it becomes part of the decision-making process, even if no one admits it out loud. The days following the preseason game were business, as usual for Sanders. He went through morning meetings, lifted in the weight room, and took his reps in practice. But there was a noticeable shift. He was getting a little more time with the first-team offense. Not enough to signal an official change, but enough to test how he handled that chemistry against the starting defense. It wasn't perfect. In one red zone drill, Sanders missed a quick throw on a fade route, putting it too far outside for his receiver to pull in. He clapped his hands once, jogged back to the huddle, and nailed the same throw 2 plays later. That's the part coaches love to see, not just execution, but the ability to self-correct instantly. Jimmy Horn Jr. was thriving with the extra work alongside him. The two picked up right where they'd left off in the joint practice, Sanders hitting him in stride on slants, Horn finding soft spots in zone coverage. The trust was evident, and defenses were starting to pick up on it, rolling coverage toward Horn in certain looks. Sanders didn't force it. He just shifted to other targets, finding his running backs or tight ends when the defense overcommit. In team meetings, Sanders kept the same approach he'd had since day one, quiet when he needed to be, vocal when it mattered. He wasn't trying to be the loudest voice in the room, but when he spoke, guys listened. He'd ask a receiver if they preferred the ball higher on a particular route, or he'd check with linemen about where they wanted the snap count. Small things, but the kind that build cohesion fast. The buzz outside the facility kept growing, too. Local sports talk hosts were openly debating whether the Browns should give Sanders the starting job sooner rather than later. Former players were weighing in on social media, calling him ahead of schedule, and the kind of rookie who forces a conversation. Sanders didn't engage with any of it. Reporters asked him about the chatter, and his answer was always the same: "My job is to be ready when my number's called. That's all I can control." It wasn't just a canned answer, he meant it. You could see it in how he carried himself. As the Browns moved into their next week of camp, the stakes subtly shifted. The veteran quarterbacks still got the bulk of the work, but the gap had closed. Sanders wasn't just getting rookie reps anymore. He was getting meaningful snaps in situations that mattered. And each time he handled them, the unspoken question grew louder. What happens if he's simply the best option? In the NFL, the transition from intriguing rookie to real contender is rarely smooth. It's usually a tug-of-war between opportunity, readiness, and politics. But every once in a while, a player makes the decision easier by showing he can do more than expected, faster than expected. That's the lane Sanders is sliding into now. If his joint practice against the Panthers was the spark, his preseason game was the kindling. The next few weeks will be about seeing if he can turn it into a sustained fire. And if the way he's been stacking days is any indication, the flames are only going to get harder to ignore.